Hey guys, Andrew Esquivel here, coming at you from my fish room. Now, don't mind the scraggly hair and beard here. Had a long day, but I want to talk about something that is a concept that I'm still playing with and still trying to get just right, because it's very difficult to do with your fish tank. Now, your fish tank, if you have it set up right and your filter is doing what it does, you have it so that the ammonia gets converted to nitrite and the nitrite gets converted to nitrate. Great! Your fish tank is cycled, right? Maybe. You see, it's called the nitrogen cycle for a reason. There's actually a last step that you can do if you can do it. In a lot of situations, it's very difficult to get it to work just right. You see, we have aerobic bacteria that grows in our filters, on our media. So this aerobic bacteria is what essentially eats the ammonia, creates waste in the form of nitrite. And then a second aerobic bacteria consumes nitrite and produces waste in the form of nitrate. And normally you would just do a water change once a week, about 25-30% of the water be swapped out with fresh water. And that's how you keep the nitrate levels down. Well, that's if you're only working with aerobic bacteria. There is another set of bacteria known as anaerobic bacteria. And in a freshwater tank, which is what we're talking about, we're not talking about saltwater, only freshwater in this video. Anaerobic bacteria is able to consume nitrate and convert it to nitrogen, which would be a gas that would just float up and disappear. It's pretty much harmless to the fish for the most part. So, there's a little bit of debate on what exactly it produces at times, depending on the specific strain of bacteria. But in the end, it should, if you got the right bacteria, it should be nitrogen. And that would make it so that your tank maintenance is taken care of for a longer amount of time. It should keep your levels pretty low, so long as you have a sufficient amount of this anaerobic bacteria. Now you may be wondering, well, how do I get anaerobic bacteria in my fish tank? This sounds great. Not easy. You see, the words aerobic and anaerobic kind of refer to something here. Anaerobic essentially means, if I'm dumbing it down here, without oxygen. So in order to grow anaerobic bacteria, you need to put it in an environment where there is little oxygen and, importantly, very little water flow. Kind of hard to do in a freshwater tank, considering we have bubblers and other sorts of means of agitating the surface water in order to create the oxygen exchange, because you need your fish to breathe. So, how then do you get this full cycle with the anaerobic bacteria? Well, here's the thing. If you've ever seen a fish in a tank that is not set up right and they're trying to gasp for oxygen, you'll notice fish stay at the top of the tank. And that's for a good reason. It's because oxygen tends to be higher up in the tank as opposed to lower down in the tank. Now, in a well-oxygenated tank with good aeration, the entire tank should have sufficient amounts of oxygen throughout the water, and thus your little buddies can swim freely to and fro as they please. So this begs the question, how do we get a bacteria which grows in an environment with little oxygen, in an environment that essentially you're trying to put oxygen in it? Well, if we put it at the very, very bottom of the tank, it might grow. Keyword might. And there's a few different types of media that specialize in anaerobic bacteria growth. The ones that I know of are C-Chem dinitrate, C-Chem matrix, and Fluval Biomax, if you get the Biomax one where it's the ceramic ring with the hole in the center. Excuse me. So, you might be wondering, well, denitrate, that sounds like what we're going for, right? Denitrate. It's in the name. Maybe. Denitrate is essentially the same thing as matrix, only it's not capable of holding the anaerobic bacteria when the water flow is higher than 50 gallons per hour. If you have a system where the flow is larger or more than 50 gallons per hour, you would use matrix, which does the same thing, it's just capable of doing it at a higher water flow rate. And then there's fluval biomax, which I'm not really sure about how that one's supposed to work because there's no real information that I found on it yet. But Seachem knows about this whole concept, and even their bacteria, Seachem Stability, contains aerobic and anaerobic bacteria in the bottle. So if you're trying to grow both, Seachem Stability is a fantastic bacterial choice for all around bacteria. That's why I use it exclusively. Super hardy bacteria and all the bacterias that you need. Now, the question is, do I put it in a filter or don't I? If you put it in a filter, theoretically it could work, because the idea behind Seachem Matrix is that the porous material has two sections. The outside of Seachem Matrix is where aerobic bacteria will grow. And inside of these little rocks that are kind of like pumice are little cavities where anaerobic bacteria can grow, because it's not directly in the face of oxygen in the water. Now, it's very debatable about whether or not that actually works. So, I had an idea. The two keys to this problem is low water flow. That's just how anaerobic bacteria likes to work. And low oxygen. So the best that I can think of is to simply take a bag, or just take some Seachem Matrix or some Seachem Denitrate, whichever tickles your fancy, put it in a media bag, preferably with big holes, not the super thin, you know, like tiny mesh ones, and put it in your tank on the surface and just let it kind of sit in an area. Because here's the thing, if you have a canister filter, you have the left side and the right side. Let's say, for instance, the left side has the intake to the filter and the right side has the outlet. So water's coming or going out and then coming in on this side, which means there's a constant flow of water going in that direction. It's gentle, but it is a water flow. And if we're talking about the bottom of the tank, that is the most likely place in which anaerobic bacteria will be able to grow, because theoretically that is where the least amount of oxygen is. So that's kind of what I did here. You'll see I've got a little bag of Seachem Matrix sitting there. It's not a lot, and it's not supposed to be. Thing about it is, it doesn't have to be. Depending on what media you get, it could house a lot or a little of anaerobic bacteria. And I have this theory that I might try out in the future if I ever get the money for it. I'm actually waiting for Seachem to respond to an email where I asked about this. I thought, okay, I have the concepts. What if I took out all the sand and just replaced my entire substrate with Seachem Denitrate or Seachem Matrix? It has the formula. It's got the gentle water flow because of the inlet and outlet of the canister filter. So it meets the under 50 gallon per hour requirement. It's at the bottom of the tank, which means it's at the lowest oxygen rich part of the tank, which means theoretically maybe anaerobic bacteria can grow down there. But it's just a theory. Now, here's the thing. Anaerobic bacteria can grow on gravel and sand, sort of. Now, each set of gravel and sand has its own properties and will only do so much. But the idea is if you have a really tall, thick sand bed, the very bottom of that sand bed is where that bacteria, that anaerobic bacteria, likes to sit. Because since it's sitting under the sand, the water can't really get at it really easily, and therefore the water that carries the oxygen can't get to that bacteria, and it's anaerobic, which means you don't want oxygen, which means that down under there is a good spot for that bacteria to grow. But if the entire substrate was C-Chem matrix and I had maybe 1 to 1.5 inches of thickness, maybe that might be enough to ensure that at least a bottom layer of this stuff could form anaerobic bacteria. And it would definitely be enough to where, since it's encompassing the entire tank, that possibly it could lower the nitrates significantly, which would be the equation for happier fish. So, it's a theory, it's a concept, it's understood, it's well known that it exists, and we know it can happen. People have done it, it's just difficult to do in a freshwater tank. That's my theory, that's my concept. I want to know what you guys think if you're an aquarist, because I seriously do want to try this, because the only other route to reducing nitrates without doing water changes is doing heavily planted tanks, because there's a lot of plants that'll suck up nitrate. I use hornwort at the moment, but holy sweet mother of mercy, hornwort grows like crazy. So, I'm looking for a more long-term practical solution. Anywho, if you're stuck with me this long, awesome. Maybe you learned a thing or two. Maybe you start to got your own, formulate your own ideas. I want to hear them. Post in the comments if this was at all helpful. And if you have any ideas, let me know. I want to try something.